Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as préféré, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello and welcome to Bruxelles, je t'aime, Euronews' talk show all about the European capital of Brussels, the city that many love to loathe. On Brussels, my love, we break down the big stories of the week, examine what's at stake for you and for Europe. My name is Méabh Mc Mahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, the ongoing fighting in Ukraine. The G20 in Bali produced a strong declaration condemning the war that has killed thousands and turned the global economy on its heels. But with no end in sight and the cost of the war felt high here in Europe, we're asking whether Europeans are still as eager to support Ukrainians and if EU leaders need to adapt their approach. And this week marked 2 months since the passing of the 22-year-old Iranian Mahsa Amini after her arrest for allegedly breaching Iran's strict dress code for girls. Her death saw protests erupt in Iran and hundreds have been killed since. Now, Iran was on the agenda of an EU Foreign Affairs meeting in Brussels this week. Light sanctions were signed off on too. We're asking, what more could Europe do to support Iranians, or if it's too busy to dare? For more on these stories and more, I'm joined in our studio by the French Left MEP, Manon, co-president of the Left Group in the European Parliament.
Hi.
Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for.
We're also joined by Anna Michelle Asimakopoulos. She's from the European People's Party, a Greek MEP. Great
Hi.
to see you. And we're also joined by the Romanian MEP, Dragos Turideke, the Vice President of Renew Europe. Good to see you too.
Thank you.
So I'm sure you all had an eye on that G20 meeting this week in Bali and world leaders there promising to support Ukraine. Will this strong statement actually change anything though on the ground? Manon Aubry?
It's good that they come up with a strong statement, but we all know that the solution will not be a military solution. Of course, it was necessary to support Ukraine, to support them also military-wise, but we might reach a sort of a deadlock there because we're reaching a point in which we see that the Ukrainian army makes some progress, but what's the solution there besides diplomacy? And that's the number one solution. There will not be any end to this war without Russia and Ukraine sitting around a table and finding an agreement. And that's what all the diplomatic efforts should go to, I think, and that's where the G20 should focus on, but also the European Union, because of course we have a specific role to play.
Okay, Manon Aubry, they're saying that we've reached a point of deadlock. Would you agree there?
That they've reached a point of deadlock? Well, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But I know that we have to stay on the right side of history, and that means we have to stay united and we have to support Ukraine throughout this. We have to stick together. The only option is to stand by them. The only option is to continue to support them. The only option is to be very, very clear in our resolve. I understand that this has a price. And yes, the price tag is higher energy prices.
This has a price, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. But Dragos, I'd like to get your perspective too on that statement coming out of the G20.
Well, diplomacy is certainly important, and I think President Zelensky has said very clearly how he sees and how Ukraine sees an end to the war and what Russia would need to do, and I fully agree with the points that Zelensky has put forward. And I also agree very much with what my colleague said about the fact that we need to be very steadfast in our resolve to continue to help Ukraine fight Russia. Let's not forget that Russia is the one that started this war, and Ukraine is defending itself, and we need to continue to support Ukraine in doing that.
And that message of support was made loud and clear this week in Brussels. Speaking earlier at an EU Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting in Brussels, we heard from Joseph Borrell. He's the EU Foreign Affairs Chief, and he promised that he still had Ukraine's back. Take a listen.
We reaffirm our top priority, and this top priority is to continue supporting Ukraine. We will continue supporting the Ukrainian people and ensure accountability for the violations of international law, war crimes committed in Ukraine. Putin is unable to conquer Ukraine. Putin is unable to defeat the Ukrainian army. Putin is withdrawing.
Putin is withdrawing, according to Joseph Borrell. Would you all agree? I mean, was the withdrawal there of Kherson the beginning of the end of the war, perhaps, Dragos?
Well, I would certainly like to believe that it is the beginning of the end of the war. I think it is an important victory for Ukraine. I do think that Ukraine can win this war on the battlefield. Of course, as I said earlier, we need to help them in doing that. But we should also not underestimate that Russia still has important capabilities on the ground. And as we see, also as we saw in the past couple of days, they have a barrage of fire against important infrastructure, energy infrastructure in Ukraine, against civilian targets again and again and again every day. This, unfortunately, is likely to continue. So I think
Michelle,
that...
a reaction there to that statement from Joseph Borrell?
Well, I mean, I agree, obviously. Nobody knows. Nobody has a crystal ball to see what's going to happen in this war, but this was a victory. Kherson was a victory for them. Where's it going? Again, what are the options? You cannot give in to blackmail. You have to stay by these. You have to stand by them. That's the only thing we can do, and I'm glad we're doing it.
But it feels like we're very much in long war mode, right, Manon Aubry?
Well, the challenge we have is that although it's true to say that Russia and Putin are slightly withdrawing themselves, but I think we're still under very severe danger, especially because they're withdrawing. They might use even more massive civilian killings as a sort of a answer to their difficulty on the ground. And that's why I come back to the point. Of course, we need to support Ukraine, and we need to do that as long as necessary. But we should not forget that the objective should be to get the end of that war. And to get the end of that war, at some point, we'll need diplomacy.
Well, you three are very much in agreement that you support Ukraine. But what about your voters, Anna Michelle? Are your voters still very much supportive of Ukraine? What's the mood over in Greece? I mean, they are, of course, paying a high price.
Yes, and as we move into winter, that becomes more of an issue. But I would say my voters still realize that they want to be on the right side of history. I would say my voters still believe that this is a worthwhile sacrifice that we're making. It's not up to the voters to deal with the consequences of what's happening. It's up to the politicians. It's up to the policymakers. We now have the responsibility to deal with the consequences of this. We're not going to. If you give in to blackmail once, then you're going to be blackmailed forever. So nobody should give in to Putin's blackmail. At the same time, we have to deal with the consequences. And Europe has not. Europe has shown unity and strength and steadfastness in its support for Ukraine. However, it has not shown the same thing when it comes to dealing with the consequences of the energy crisis or with the inflation, which is not just due to the war, but the additional inflationary pressures that have been.
That's the view from Greece. And what about the view from Romania? Is support for Ukraine waning there?
Well, I recently spent a week, we had the Green Week recently, and I spent a week among my voters. And clearly there is frustration and fatigue with the consequences of the war, because of course no one likes a cold house or half a meal. But at the same time, because Romania is a neighboring country to Ukraine and has received a lot of Ukrainian refugees, it's very difficult to find a Romanian family that hasn't somewhat been touched by the tragedy of the Ukrainian people. And I think the support is still strong. Again, the frustration is targeting more the politicians, the national politicians, the governments, because they are looking for solutions. And I think rightly so, they are looking for solutions to their plight. But again, I don't think there is a waning support and understanding of what happens in Ukraine and the need to continue to support them.
Okay. And briefly in France, what's the mood?
Well, I think we should be very careful. If we want to maintain public support to Ukraine, the EU must face its responsibilities. And I kind of agree with you that the war is not responsible of everything, and of everything as part of the inflation. In French, we would say la guerre a bon dos, meaning that the war is a good excuse sometimes. Take the energy market, for example. Well, we could have reformed the energy market earlier to make sure that other energy sources like electricity is not as expensive as gas, for example. We could have also done a bit more, and we could question the policy of the current European Central Bank, increasing the interest rate. So I think we should be careful that to say, there's a tendency at the moment at the EU to say, well, you've got to make efforts, otherwise you don't support Ukraine. Everyone supports Ukraine, but the question is the role and the responsibilities of the EU to actually be dealing with its responsibilities and to change what needs to be changed on the energy market, on, for example, the fact that we bring back the Growth and Stability Pact, that is the economic measure, the economic governance measure, imposing some reforms to countries, making some cuts in the public services. Well, those are questions that should be tackled no matter what's going on with the war, I think.
Should be tackled. Any reaction there to that?
Well, you can always see the glass as half empty or half full. That's always a choice, right?
Well, yours seems to be quite full.
There you go. Well, that's the optimistic perspective of things. But crises are always an opportunity to correct things. And I think that this war in Ukraine, if you look at it as the glass being half full, is a catalyst for change. Just like the pandemic was a catalyst for change for our digital transition, this is a catalyst for change for our environmental, for our Green Deal, for our energy transition. We realize that we have these very dangerous dependencies and that we have to be value-based in our collaboration internationally in a rules-based ordered world.
But a catalyst for change that perhaps came a bit too late, no, Dragos? So many years relying on Russia?
Yeah, it's been a year and a half.
It's always, in hindsight, you realize that you should have done things earlier. And certainly, again, if we are to talk about energy and the need to reform the energy market, now we realize that the dependency that we've allowed to go for too long, I mean, we've known since 2014 what it means to be dependent on Russian fossil fuels, gas and oil, and still we haven't accelerated a transition out of that. And it's good that we're doing it now. Again, looking at the glass half full, it's good that we're doing it now. I don't think we're doing it with enough vigor, but still, it's better late than never.
I might just do two remarks. The first one, I'm glad to hear that the right wing, the liberals, are now saying we need to reform the energy market. We've been calling for a reform of the energy market for years. And the war has started more than a year and a half ago, and the energy market is still not reformed. So I think it's coming very late and not to the point where we should go. And the second remark is, I'm also glad to hear that we need to get out of fossil fuels. But a couple of months ago, the European Parliament, we did not vote it in favor as the left, but the rest of the Parliament voted to include both gas and nuclear energy, but in particular gas, into what we call the taxonomy, which is the qualification of green energy. And this happened just months ago, meaning that we are going to support the financing of gas. That is not only a polluting energy, but we all know the consequences of
this. Of
now
course, then a very confusing
exactly
signal. And
so I really call for consistency.
Anna Michelle, I mean,
well, change doesn't have to be violent. Change has to be measured, and change has to. We have to deal with the consequences on people's daily lives, and there are many economies that need gas at the moment, so that's just a reality. So I think we have to be ambitious, but I also think we have to be practical and pragmatic, and I think that that's what this taxonomy decision was about. We also have to yield to the realities in different member states. We are 27 member states that have very different realities with respect to energy and energy dependencies. We saw that, and we have to accommodate for that, but mostly we have to show the resolve and, as Dragos said, finally the speed in dealing with the consequences for our citizens. That's what they expect from us at national levels and certainly at a European level, and we cannot let them down for reasons that have to do not just with energy transition but with geopolitics, and ultimately because they're paying the price for democracy, and we need to support them in that.
And one thing you've all mentioned earlier is the importance of diplomacy in finding an answer to this war, in ending the war. But earlier this week, we saw talks take place between the head of the CIA and his Russian counterpart in Turkey, but there was no Europeans around the table. Should Europe have a voice there? Dragos?
Well, depending on what the discussions were about, and we don't know that. If
we
the
believe
discussions
de-escalation.
Yeah, well, if the discussions were about, indeed, about Ukraine and Russia, then Europe should have been in that conversation. But let's not forget that over the last months, in fact, since the start of the war, I think the context and the cooperation and the coordination between the US and the European partners has been as strong as ever. And I think it has shown on the battlefield, it has shown in the support that was given to Ukraine. So I would not at all draw any conclusions out of that particular meeting in a way that would somewhat exclude the Europeans from the discussion table, even on important matters such as possible de-escalation.
So no speculation there, but one thing That is sure. Here in Europe, we've become a safe haven for many Ukrainian refugees. According to the UNHCR, the EU has welcomed 4.3 million Ukrainian refugees since February. 1.5 million are registered in Poland, 1 million in Germany, and almost 500,000 in the Czech Republic. France has taken in 119,000, Romania 88,000, and Greece 20,000. I want to ask you first, because in Greece only 20,000 for a country of over 10 million.
Well, yeah, but we have a lot of other refugees. Remember, we're that country that is the external border of Europe that has been receiving refugees for years and years, and expecting Europe to show its solidarity in coming up with a migration pact that actually lets them be apportioned based on various criteria and not just throwing money at the problem and leaving them in our country. So I think that explains the numbers.
And can Europe afford these refugees, do you think, Manon Aubry?
Of course. I mean, I'm glad that there's been almost no hesitation on welcoming refugees from Ukraine, and I just wish that there will be similarly no hesitation when it is to welcome other people fleeing wars, because unfortunately it's not the only war. Around the world, people are fleeing Syria and other countries, and I'm kind of really shocked by the way you've probably followed the Ocean Viking boat has been treated. So that boat has been around on the Mediterranean Sea for almost 3 weeks. They've been rescuing more than 200 people that would die otherwise. And then there's been a game between France and Italy of
we covered that here last week in France.
Yeah, sending the ball back and forth. And well, I just wish that there would have been similarly no hesitation, as with the Ocean Viking, as with the Ukrainian refugees. And unfortunately, this is not happening. So one should question consistency once again, I think.
Just to go back, Manon Aubry, to Ukraine, which is what we're discussing here, of course, and the fact that the European Parliament, I believe, very soon is planning to vote on a resolution declaring Russia as a terrorist state. Do you think this will make a difference? Will you be signing up to this resolution, Anna Michelle?
Well, my political family in the European Parliament, the European People's Party, has prepared a draft that does exactly what you said. And I hope that we will be able to build a consensus around this opening position. It makes a big difference when you have a very strong voice, a united voice coming out of the Parliament on Russia.
Do you feel like you're making a difference?
Yes, I do. There are many who say that, well, what does the European Parliament do? They issue resolutions. They are not actually equating to decisions that are being felt on the ground. But I beg to differ. And I think that if we look at the past couple of years from the pandemic onwards, I think the political signals that the Parliament has passed through its resolutions were political signals that were then followed through with decisions in the Council at the Commission level. So I do think that the political signal that will pass also on this issue will be an important one that also will matter in the discussions in the Council.
Okay, and from the European Parliament, did you notice a recent surprise trip that the British street artist Banksy made to Ukraine? He created 7 murals, mostly in areas hardest hit by Russian bombs. One picture shows a metal tank trap as a seesaw. Did you see the pictures?
No.
They're coming up there on your screens. I mean, Banksy doing his bit there to remind the world how damaged the country is and how much help it will need going forward. Because according to the IMF, Ukraine will need $3 to $4 billion per month in external aid just to keep the government afloat. I mean, this is really not sustainable.
Well, the Commission is proposing an unprecedented $18 billion as macro-financial assistance for the Ukraine for next year. So that's quite something, and it's tangible. I mean, I feel the same way. I would like the European Parliament, which is the voice of the people, to have as much power as possible. We do have power over the budget. Our voice, as Dragos has said, matters, and the Council has to listen to us. But the MFA also is very promising that we're actually putting our money putting the money where our mouth is.
Putting your money where your mouth is. So just briefly, a quick answer from you all. So should the EU continue with its approach vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine and its stance with Russia?
Absolutely. No hesitation.
But that is, I'm afraid, all we have time for. We'll be keeping a very close eye on how that story develops. But for now, thank you so much to you all. And stay with us here on Euronews, because after the break, We'll be asking how the European Union can help solve a problem like Iran. See you soon here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Méabh Mc Mahon, where we're reflecting back on some of the big European stories of the week. And one item that caught our eye here was on Monday, when the EU Foreign Affairs Council agreed to sanction 29 Iranians with asset freezes and travel bans. So I'd like to ask my panel, is that the best that the European Union can come up with? Will these sanctions even bite? And should Europe care more about what's going on in Iran? Manon Aubry, I'd like to start with you.
Well, first I wanted to really highlight the courage of the women taking to the streets. And I think we can call it a revolution because they've been joined by men. And now they're really contesting the whole power. It's not only an issue about what you can wear in the street as a woman. It's a fight against a corrupted state and sort of an oligarchy. And similarly as for Ukraine, we should do everything possible to support the people there. So it includes sanctions, indeed, but it includes diplomacy once again. And
are we doing everything we can? That is the question, of course, Dragos. Is Europe doing what it can to support these people?
Well, certainly I would like that we do more. Because the Iranian people need our support, and most importantly, I think they need a sign of solidarity from us, even if it's a political sign of solidarity, because there aren't many means to actually help them on the ground. But I think that already is an important thing, and I certainly look forward to the debate and resolution that we will have next week in Parliament, because that will also be another occasion to do that. I would also like to see more sanctions, in fact. I would like to see all of the legislators in Iran who actually voted for a severe repression of the uprising be sanctioned, because they need to feel the consequences of their actions.
And what about you, Anna Michelle? What do you think Europe should do? Should it care more? Is it prioritising the people of Iran enough?
I think Iran is an authoritarian Islamic state that exports terrorism and violence and has brutally oppressing its own people at the moment. And I think that you ask if these sanctions bite. Yeah, they're a mosquito bite, though, than when you need a cobra bite. So I would think at the very least to honor and make sure that the death of Mahsa Amini is something that was not done in vain. We should immediately say that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is a terrorist organization, because that's exactly what it is.
And that's another discussion that's being had, and I think Germany was pushing for that to happen, in fact, for them to be declared as a terrorist state or a terrorist organisation.
Well, again, the way the EU should approach it is using all of the tools to put some pressure. So, and I think some I've been a bit shy. For example, I remember the president of my country, Emmanuel Macron, has been having a meeting with the head of state of Iran the very same week of the death of Mahsa Amini. So those are the type of signs that we should be careful of, and not good signs that are sent. And on the other hand, we in the parliament should be, maybe welcoming some of the opponents in the chamber. We should think about initiative that does put some pressure on Iran.
Well, one thing we have seen in the parliament is one of your counterparts, a Swedish MEP, cutting her hair.
Yeah.
Live in the plenary, and also a number of French actresses, they cut their hair as well. Would you cut your hair?
Yeah, I could definitely do that. I think it can all even be a coordinated way. It's everything we can do to bring attention to it, and it works, because then people are talking about it.
Well, it works, but it's already 1 month since they cut their hair, and nothing really has changed on the ground. Anna Michelle, would you cut your hair? How far would you go to support these people?
I think that symbolic gestures are very important, and in fact, they do create awareness, but we're past the point of trying to create awareness now. Now there's serious violence on the streets. This is a revolution, so the least we can do is designate those who are responsible for this. It's the IRGC who is doing the suppressing now. So the least we can do is call them out on it, and at least as a parliament, that's the most we can do.
But this week in Brussels, the foreign affairs ministers from all around the continent met. I think they dedicated maybe 30 minutes to Iran. They're not prioritising Iran. Are they too overwhelmed? Are they too busy with other issues, more domestic issues?
Well, there are certainly other issues, but I think Iran should be on the top of the agenda right now, also for our ministers of foreign affairs. And they should be dedicating time, and again, symbolically, they should be taking any action and pass any messages that are giving the Iranians who are in the street the feeling that we are by their side. And I think that's the importance in these signals, including the gesture of my colleague Kate here in the plenary, because what we hear from the Iranian organizations on the ground is that they need these sort of signals, they need these sort of symbols coming out of Europe.
And why should our viewers be concerned about this? What's at stake for them?
Well, because it's first off is human rights, and human rights is universal, and everyone should be enjoying human rights, whether you're in France, in Germany, in Greece, or in Iran. And when human rights are attacked in one part of the world, it means that it opens the door to be attacked somewhere else. So I think, even though you're not Iranian, you might never go to Iran, at the end of the day, this can happen also in our country. So that's why we need to be firm, and we need to use all of the tools to say, well, what's going on in Iran is not acceptable. This is not democracy. And women's rights have to be protected there, but everywhere around the world.
And Dragos, you said you were looking forward to the debate that the European Parliament will have next week. Do you fear, though, that in 1 year's time you could still be having a similar debate?
Well, it might be, but I don't think that should stop us from, again, speaking very loudly and very clearly about what we think of the Iranian regime. I very much agree with my colleague. We as Europeans, we are the cradle of democracy here. We are the cradle of human rights. And I think their quest for freedom is something that we absolutely need to support, even if, again, concretely on the ground there is not much we can do. But this is important, again, from the feedback that we receive there. These messages and these signals are important for them.
Okay. And Anna Michelle, I saw you joined a letter to the European Commission on the topic with a number of other MEPs. I also wanted to ask you all, have you seen the poster right here in Brussels in the museum district, right on the Magritte Museum, saying, say her name? It's there. That's Brussels Way, the city of Brussels way of showing its support to Iran. But I'm afraid that is all we have time for this block. So thank you so much for your perspectives and your insights. It's a story that we will return to a lot here on Euronews, that of the plight of the people of Iran, with many taking to the streets again this week and many being taken behind bars. But thank you so much for watching. See you soon on Euronews. Hello there, this is Brussels, my love, with me, Méabh Mc Mahon, where we're taking a look back at some of the big European stories of the week. And one major event that had us glued this week was the COP27 climate gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh. Quite an event. It looked a bit like a festival, a bit like a trade fair, and a plenary session all in one. Did you all watch it closely?
Yes, of course.
Anna Michelle?
Couldn't miss it.
Exactly.
You did? Okay, we'll take a look at this clip and see if you've seen it already.
This cannot be the COP where we lose 1.5.
1.5 to survive. 1.5 to survive. 1.5 to survive.
1.5 to save Tuvalu. 1.5 to save Tuvalu.
1.5 to save Tuvalu. Protesters there calling for more support for the island nation Tuvalu that actually could disappear due to climate change. So my question to the panel today is, was COP a flop? Or is it useful? Was it 2 weeks of wasted time, or was it worth all that energy? Dragos?
Well, this is a question with every COP almost. Do they achieve enough? Are they good? Should actually they happen? I think they should, because even if they are not maybe as decisive as we would like them to be on some very concrete outcomes that we'd like to see from them, the fact that this conversation exists, the fact that we get to hear some of these protests outside the meeting room, I think that's important because it shows how much relevance this conversation on global warming
Anna Michelle,
has.
Your thoughts?
Tackling climate change is existential, and it's unifying. We can't do it alone. So even if COP is overrated, I don't care, as long as we're talking.
Even if it's overrated and it takes place in the middle of the desert?
And it's sponsored by Coca-Cola. It is one of the main polluters around the world. We're COP27 now, and the 1.5 degrees objective target has been agreed in COP21 in Paris 6 COP ago, and there's almost no country around the world respecting this objective. It says something about how far we are from the objective, how far we are from saving the planet. And this call from activists is a call that everyone should hear, and I should say everyone should hear also here in the European Parliament, because even our own European Parliament and our own European Union is not aligned with the Paris Agreement. We should reduce our energy,
Exactly, so that's my question.
CO2 emission by 65%.
Are politicians then fooling themselves by going and saying all those amazing words in front of the world press?
Words.
And they feel great about themselves, but actually then in reality, it's so different when they get back home and they speak to your local voters as well. I mean, it's not so simple.
Well, reality checks are never simple. And again, the reality shows us that this transition is not a simple one. We were speaking earlier about nuclear and gas. These are things that we have to deal with. But I think the commitment, the political commitment is there. I think it's been stronger over the last 3 years than I've at least ever seen it at European level. And I think we need to, my glass is still half full, so I think we still need to look at the future with the trust that we now have, the political will and the determination, to actually achieve these objectives.
Same optimism from yourself, Anna Michelle, or what's your...
Well, I agree political grandstanding can be rather boring and unproductive. However, it's just part of life. Ultimately, yes, you have to cater to reality, and the reality is that somebody pays the price for the transition. And again, this is Europe's moment to rise to the occasion and quickly deal with the consequences of this transition, whether it has to do with war, whether it has to do with our values, whether it has to do with energy.
And the UN Secretary General there, Antonio Guterres, he didn't mince his words when he said that we're on a highway to climate hell.
Yeah, and we're taking it full speed. So again, if we want to be consistent here in the European Union, we should question the number of free trade agreements that we are signing that gets, projects coming from the other sides of the world. We should question the support that we're giving to fossil fuels, and this needs to change. Otherwise, that pathway, we're going to get until the end.
Okay, Manon Prix, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Anna Michelle and Dragos, for being here. And thank you so much for watching. That is, I'm afraid, all we have time for on this week, the week the world population reached 8 billion. Thanks again to our panel. Thank you very much for joining. We'll see you soon on Euronews and Euronews.com.